and thanks for coming to see me, but I also brought with me Mr. Joe Hill. Joe is a winner and current holder of the title Greatest Writer in America as far as I'm
So, you'll get your 20 after this is over.
That's it. I'm going to 20. So anyway, thanks a lot for coming. There's a lot of reasons to have this panel, and there's always great reasons to talk to Joe. But one is that this Wednesday, the first issue of Alpha comes out, right? Which is great, but it's also sad because it's the end of one of the greatest comics we've all ever seen. So anyway, I don't know if you can hear he praised upon you, Joe. But, okay, so I have a two-part question for you, Joe.
Okay.
And one is that, it's a story I've heard you tell a couple of times, but when you set out to start writing Locke Key, how much of the end game did you have in mind?
It's a story you've heard a couple times, but like a fine cheese, it gets better with age. When I started Locke Key, I was just flying by the seat of my pants. I knew there was a bad thing down the well, and I knew that the house was full of keys. Should I stand? Can everyone see okay? Yeah, okay.
You mean slouch?
How's that? Comes the mics.
When I started out, I was just flying by the seat of my pants, and I didn't know much about the backstory. I was just having fun. I knew that there were all these different keys. I had some ideas about what some of the keys would do, and I knew there was a bad thing in the well that wanted to get a key that it shouldn't be allowed to have. And then about 5 issues into the series, I got a chance to ask Alan Moore a question for an interview. An interviewer was having all these different comic writers ask Alan Moore questions. And Alan Moore is just about my favorite living writer. He would be right on the short list of my 5 or 6 favorite living writers. I revere his work, and he's a big part of the reason why I write comics. And so I asked him, how important is it to know the answers to the questions you raise when you start writing a comic, and how important is it to have some ideas about where you're going? And he didn't exactly say it like this, but essentially I think what he said is only a complete asshat would raise questions they didn't have answers to in the story. And I realized he was describing me. So then as we wrapped up Welcome to Lovecraft, Gabriel Rodriguez and I took a step back, and we talked about the story, and we talked about the characters, and in the end we came up with an 18-page Bible, the Key House Bible, which documented everything that had happened from the very beginning of the story in the Revolutionary War up until the moment that Rendell Locke gets shot in the face at the beginning of Welcome to Lovecraft. And at that point, I felt like we didn't make a plan about where we were going to end, but we did know everything that had happened to set up the situation. And Gabe especially was able to litter the comics with little Easter eggs that reached back to events we hadn't yet revealed. And I do feel that we were able to come up with answers to our questions that were fairly elegant and compact. Part of the problem with shows like The X-Files, long-running series with a big mythology, is they keep, they raise one mystery after another, and the mysteries get stacked higher and higher until suddenly you realize there's no way they could ever have an answer for all of this bullshit. And we didn't want to get in that fix. We didn't want to get in a situation where we could never have a satisfying wrap-up. And the other part of this is that there was, so we had the whole backstory worked out when we were just about halfway through the comic, when we were working on the end of Keys to the Kingdom, I think it was, in the middle of Keys to the Kingdom. Fox Television decided to make a TV show out of Locke Key. They produced a pilot, they filmed it in Pittsburgh. The show is now in its 2nd hit season in my imagination. In real life, it got knocked out of the way for Alcatraz, which of course is in its 2nd hit season in Fox's imagination. But the best part of we were on set for about a week, And the best part of it wasn't watching them film the show, although that was pretty great. The best part of it was afterwards, Gabriel Rodriguez and I would get to go back to the hotel bar and we would talk about Locke and Key. And we would make up new keys and new situations and develop our ideas. And together over the course of 2 nights, we largely hammered out the end of the story. Yeah.
So
that's a new part of the story.
That is a new part of the story.
I just made it up 10 minutes ago. No, sorry.
Well, but you knew you were going to ask yourself that question. So.
Yeah.
So how much, where it ended up with those conversations with Gabe, how much surprises you about the turns it took? Like, if you went back and talked to yourself when you had those conversations about the Bible, did this go where you thought it was going to go?
In both cases, both with the backstory that we developed, the backstory we developed was fairly intricate. But by the time we finished, over the course of Clockworks, we largely revealed all the important elements of the backstory. We explained where the keys come from and why Dodge is as awful as he or she is. And you know, what happened to the Keepers of the Keys and the Tamers of the Tempest back in the 1980s. And it was all pretty much like we discussed, but it was simpler and cleaner. There were a lot of ornaments and a lot of motivations that we had worked out that were very intricate, that in the end we didn't need and just kind of crumbled away. And I would say that in some ways that was also true of the ending. The extra wrinkles we didn't need fell away, things that would have just complicated.
Right. No spoilers, haven't read it yet.
There aren't going to be, right, there aren't, I'm gonna studiously avoid, I'm not going to say anything about Alpha 2, and there's not much to say about Alpha 1. I mean, beyond, you know, all the major characters dying on page 2. Which left us in a funny place, but we had some filler.
So I threw this, we threw Chris Ryle, actually, who's not here, unfortunately. Love it if he was.
But that does allow us to talk shit about him. Chris Ryle, my friend, and the editor of Locke and Key. And
he's the best editor in comics, too.
He is the best editor in comics.
He is the best editor in comics.
If he was working with DC, Catwoman would be married now. It's Batgirl. It's Batgirl.
That woman.
Would be married if he was working.
Probably. Yeah, people would be happier. Everyone would be happier.
That's why we threw this in there, too, because these are the keys that Izzy made.
Yeah.
Which,
and when we did this, the panel, this refers back to a panel from Welcome to Lovecraft. And when we did this panel, we didn't know what some of these keys would do yet. We had some theories and some ideas, but we're still working it out.
Alan Moore would not approve of it.
Alan Moore would not approve of it. Yeah. Well, one of the things about the keys, though, that I wanted to say is, you know, when I grew up, one of the writers that mattered most to me in the world, and still does matter most to me in the world, is Neil Gaiman. And I loved the Sandman series. And I got to a point where I wanted to have my own long-running comic book series. And I wanted to test myself, you know, and see if I could tell an interesting story month after month after month. Like Neil had done in Sandman, and Brian K. Vaughan did in Why Last Man, and Alan Moore in Swamp Thing, and all these writers who really inspired me that I love. And I was looking for something that some hook that I could use to tell any story I wanted. And at a certain point after I developed the idea for Locke and Key, I realized that I could always invent a key to tell any story I wanted. If I wanted to tell a story about race, I could invent a key that would change a person's race. If I wanted to tell a story about gender, I could invent a key that would change someone's gender. So a guy could experience what it's like to be a woman, and a woman could experience what it's like to be a guy. And there was all these ways to play with identity and possibility, and that I thought and so in that way the keys are like dreams in Sandman. They're just sort of an instrument, a tool that I can use, that I can apply and fiddle with any subject that I think is interesting.
I love that analogy. That's great. So I threw these up, Chris. These are the 6 variant covers that we're doing for the second issue of Alpha, you may have seen, by 6 extremely talented artists. We got Bernie Wrightson up there on the top left. Then down below him is Dave Sim. In the middle top, you've got Mike Kaluta. In the middle bottom is Simon Beasley. Top right is Bill Sienkiewicz, I believe. And then Glenn Fabry down at the bottom there. But the coolest thing about this, I think, is we solicited all these covers for the last issue, but we also solicited a cover by Gabe. And retailers had the chance to order as many of any of these covers that they wanted, and more than 2 to 1 they ordered Gabe over all of these guys, which is just cool. I mean, it illustrates what a part of the series Gabe is.
Yeah, and someone outside the door asked if we could talk about what's on the cover of issue 2, but actually because we're avoiding spoilers, no. The cover of issue 2, the only thing I will say about the cover of issue 2 is I think in a lot of ways it brings things full circle back to where we started. A couple things about the variant covers. My understanding is Mike Kaluta's right hand fell off drawing all those keys, and that he's been interred in a psychiatric ward ever since. And also, Gabe was ecstatic over the Bernie Wrightson, because when he drew Dead Dodge for the first time, when he drew that underwater corpse down in the bottom of the drowning cave, his reference was Bernie Wrightson's corpses. From all the old Bernie Wrightson work. So for him to see Bernie Wrightson doing Gabe, doing Bernie Wrightson, you know, it's like Gabeception.
Let's see. Actually, I think I have a Gabe-related slide coming up here. Oh no, these are little teases from Alpha. Close your eyes if you don't want to see some of this stuff.
That's fucking good.
Oh. This is all you get, by the way. Gotta wait till Wednesday.
Nah. Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah. Here's a quick segue.
Okay. All right. Yeah, sure.
We're going to open it up to questions pretty quick, because I'm sure a lot of you guys will have better questions than I have for Joe. So let's talk a little bit about Wraith.
Yeah. So I had I have a day job as a novelist. And I wrote a novel that came out earlier this year that's called Nosferatu, and actually weather, you know, everything, you know, wainscoting on the walls and the paintings and the books and all the rest of it. But it's really those characters, you know, you look at their faces and you feel what they're feeling. And I feel like once you can emotionally identify with the characters, then when they're put in danger, your heart begins to race. And that's how good horror works. Good horror is not about sadism and brutality. Good horror is about empathy. It's about loving someone and then seeing them suffer the worst and rooting for them to find a way to kick their way out of the darkness. And I felt that Gabe could show that. Yeah, go ahead.
Playing right off of that, from Nosferatu, I listened to the audio version of that.
Yeah, Kate Mulgrew, he's talking about the audio version of Nosferatu. Kate Mulgrew, Captain Janeway, did the reading for Nosferatu. It's an amazing, beautiful reading. She did a great job with it. So, yeah.
I mirror that. Charlie Banks was perfect by her. How much do you have input-wise in choosing the cast for that, or is that something?
How much input did I have in choosing the readers of the audiobooks? A fair amount. I pushed hard to get Stephen Lang to read Heart-Shaped Box. And I love Stephen Lang's voice, and I loved it when he brought Heart-Shaped Box with my first novel, which is about a heavy metal musician who buys a ghost on the internet. It goes badly. Stephen Lang just had so much new, and he's just got a great, great, great voice. And I felt the same way about Kate Mulgrew. Kate Mulgrew read a short story of mine called By the Silver Waters of Lake Champlain. And I listened to it with so much happiness. She's just funny, and she did characters, and she had all these emotional nuances, and I just felt like she really, you know, squeezed the most out of that story. And I knew I wanted Nosferatu to be from a female point of view, that I wanted a female reader for it because it has a female lead. And so I got Kate Mulgrew. I was very lucky that she agreed to do it, but if I have my way, she'll read all the stuff that I do from a female perspective, and Stephen Lang will read all the stuff I do from a male perspective. I just think they're awesome. Yeah, go ahead.
The overall majority of your published work has always been kind of these modern ghost stories.
Yeah.
I was kind of curious because I read in that New York Times article that you write constantly and have since you were fairly young. If you ever dabbled in any just completely far off genre that you've never published in, something like, you know, like space opera, or just something totally opposite.
Like torture porn, for example.
Yeah. I just got drawer after drawer of slash fictions. Fiction. Actually, I have written outside of the genre with which I'm most identified with, and I have a novella called Gunpowder, which is a science fiction thing, like that's set on like another world. It's about a single parent figure taking care of a clan of half-savage boys on a frozen planet. Come to think of it, it's actually a lot like my life. And I've done one novella in the Gunpowder series, and I'll be doing more of that. When I started writing with a goal towards getting published professionally, I made two decisions. One was that I was going to change my last name and write under a pen name. And the other was that I was going to write stuff that was nothing like the stuff with which my family is sometimes known. My dad is also a writer. He's had some success. He's shown early promise. So I started writing the kind of stuff that I was reading in the New Yorker. And I was writing as Joe Hill. I had dropped my last name. The decision to continue to write under the pen name was a great decision, and I've stuck with it ever since. The decision to write mainstream fiction didn't stick, and I think that was also very lucky. I didn't read that kind of stuff. Mostly I thought that kind of stuff was pretty boring, and my own stories that were mainstream fiction bored me. When I was growing up as a kid and other kids had posters on the walls of like rock stars and athletes, all my posters were ripped out of Fangoria magazine. And all the guys I read were like Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore and my dad, and Frank Miller and Arthur Conan Doyle and Ray Bradbury and Clive Barker, and it just didn't make sense. It just wasn't where my heart was. I tried to write mainstream fiction for about 2 or 3 years, and then out of the blue I wound up writing a story called Pop Art, which is about the friendship between a juvenile delinquent and an inflatable boy named Arthur Roth. Art is plastic and filled with air. He weighs 6 ounces, and if he sat in a sharpened pencil, it would kill him. And I just had so much fun writing that story. It was like such a good, I had not had fun in years writing anything. And coincidentally, it sold the second place I sent it. And after that, I kind of decided to let my freak flag fly. But I am even now writing stuff that's not necessarily ghost stories. The new book, The Fireman, is suspenseful and has fantastic elements, but I guess I would describe more loosely as kind of, modern science fiction, more in line, less like Hell House and more like, the Andromeda Strain. Not that it's about diseases or anything, but, less Richard Matheson, more Michael Crichton, I guess is what I'm saying. Yes, sir.
I was wondering how you feel Lovecraft influences Locke Key, because you have references to him, but there's nothing in it that is that you could say is taken from a Lovecraft story.
Yeah, the question is how much did Lovecraft influence Locke Key, and the answer is not much. I just thought it was really funny that a family that had been through tragedy would try to rebuild their lives in Lovecraft, Massachusetts. The only thing that would be better if they signed up to be camp counselors at Crystal Lake, Nevertheless, it does have some Lovecraftian riffs. It's clear that world on the other side of the Black Door isn't just another world, but another kind of dimension. The things on that other side of the door can't even really exist in our world without attaching to a human spirit. And they are sort of, the thousand young of, Lovecraft's goat of 1,000 young. And there's some references along that. But then, I got someone was like, Naharlahotep actually doesn't look anything like the creatures on the side of the Black Door. And I was like, I didn't know that. So a little bit, not a whole lot. I'll say something really, really sacrilegious, which is that I think that Lovecraft was a brilliant thinker about horror, maybe not actually all that much of a writer. The stories are so overheated and overwritten. The language in the stories is so thick, it's almost a little bit like drinking cream.
Wasn't that just sort of how they wrote back then?
Yeah, that's how some of them wrote, but Hemingway was doing things differently at the Saturday Evening Post. So Lovecraft was, I think, in some ways out of step with what was happening with language. And he was an American, and I wish he had written in American, as opposed to writing in some kind of faux 18th century English. That's just my own, Yeah, go ahead.
In Nosferatu, you had this map full of Easter eggs.
Yeah.
And Orphan Hinge was one
Yeah.
that hasn't been anything.
Yeah.
Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, there's so a kid gets snatched by Charlie Manx, and he's in the car with his iPhone. So what are you going to do? You use Find My iPhone. So they use Find My iPhone to find him, only it brings up this map, and it's the United Map of American Inscapes, and it's this deformed version of America. And it turns out the kid is on the Kris Kringle Highway, the St. Nicholas Parkway, and he's going past the Valley of Giant Toys. And there's all these points of interest littered on the map, including the Treehouse of the Mind, which is a location in Horns, and the Night Road, which is a location mentioned in Heart-Shaped Box, and also Orphan Hedge, which is a location not mentioned in anything. That's because there's a book that I've been meaning to write called Orphan Hedge, but I don't know when I'll get around to it. There's a couple other things. There's a character I've had in mind for years called the Walking Backwards Man, and the Walking Backwards Man has come up a couple times now in stories. I know everything about this character, I just haven't figured out how to write a novel about him, but he's a scary dude. There's also a rough sketch. There's a character in Nosferatu named Margaret Leigh. Maggie is a librarian with a unique psychic power. She has this bottomless bag of Scrabble tiles, and when she wants to answer a question, she can reach into it, dig around, and throw the tiles down, and then spell the answers. So she can find out all these secrets with her bottomless bag of Scrabble tiles. And she tells us she sometimes engages with other people who have similar marvelous powers, and she tells us a story about a girl with a wheelchair who could do something impossible with that wheelchair. And I think that there's going to be a novella, I'm working on a book of novellas, and I think there's going to be a novella in that book called The Crooked Alley, which will tell that character's story too. So, I'm good at this. I'm good at coming up with stories, but it's coming up with stories is the easy part. It's the execution that's the slow part. I'm just really, really, really painfully slow because I have a tendency to keep questioning myself and keep wondering if it can be better and insecurity. Okay.
This gentleman here.
Given that you've done work right now a lot in print and now in comics, how much do you find as a storyteller do you need an artist, even though you can do it independently without them? And then how much do you find that the artist doesn't need a writer?
I was just complaining about Lovecraft writing 18th century fiction in 1930. I do think that modern writers gave up on two aspects of 19th century fiction that they never should have walked away from. One was the decision to write episodically. Oliver Twist was written episodically. It was the Lost of its day. There was a frenzy of excitement for that story and for Great Expectations, which came out in pieces. In some ways, Sherlock Holmes was a TV series in print. It came out, in closed standalone stories, but in the Strand magazine, and you knew if you were getting the Strand magazine, you were going to get 6 Sherlock Holmes stories a year. And I think the decision to write episodically is very satisfying and brings out the best in storytellers. I also think that fiction used to be illustrated, and then in the era of Hemingway, that this idea sort of developed that real grown-up readers don't need pictures. You make the pictures in your head, and only children need the crutch of illustration. But illustration is art. Illustration is beautiful, and it enhances a book and makes it... And we relearned this lesson with the Harry Potter novels, where it was clear that lots of grown-ups just adored the stories, but also the Mary Grand Prix illustrations that were in the stories, and the whole luxurious feel of those books, the soapy feel of the covers and stuff. And when I got into writing comics, one of the reasons I got into it was because I love comics, but another reason was because I wanted to write episodic fiction, and I wanted to write illustrated fiction, and comics were the only place I could do it. So those are both values I like. That said, Gabe and I have Gabe is drawing the last issue of Alpha now. We're going to do a superhero thing, a standalone after that. I finished scripting Wraith. Wraith is actually, all 7 issues are completely written in first draft. After I finish with this superhero story that Gabe and I are doing, I will have written 50 comic scripts in my career, 50 published scripts. And that feels like a good place to take a break for a while. I have some prose stuff that I want to work on and a couple novels lined up that I want to finish. So I think I'm going to take a year or 2 off from the comics.
Boo. Who's next?
How about that?
Yeah.
A couple years ago, I was one of the lucky ones to see the Locke Key pilot at San Diego Comic-Con at your panel. And it was awesome for people who didn't get to see it. I thought the show was really out of this world.
I thought it was pretty great too.
And my question is, with it being passed over, are there any more opportunities for like maybe a movie or anything in the works?
Yeah.
Or,
is there going to be a Locke Key movie or another TV series? And the answer is we don't know. There was Alex Kurtzman and Bob Orsai did produce a terrific pilot directed by Mark Romanek and written from a script by Joshua Friedman, who wrote was the showrunner for the Sarah Connor Chronicles, great writer. They did a terrific job. The pilot came out really well. It was very spooky, very atmospheric, had great acting. The kid who played Bodhi, Skylar Gagnon, was just such a cute kid and so great. And so natural. Yeah, and Sam Wester, the kid who played in Keninsey Solo, who played Dodge down in the well, and it was all there. We came very close. It was an expensive show to produce, and so it was hard to find anyone on cable who wanted to take it on at the kind of budget that they had essentially planned for, and they couldn't seem to rework the plan to make it a cheaper kind of thing. So it fell apart as a TV show. The rights came back to us. We have talked to Universal, where there's been the possibility of doing a series of feature films, also with Bob Orsai and Alex Kurtzman, which would be wonderful because I love those guys and I think they make great films. They've had their hands all over, pretty much every hit this summer, and have a fantastic feel for character. But there is not actually, even though there have been reports to the contrary, there is not actually a deal with Universal. There is not actually a movie in the works at the moment. So there's a lot of interest, but nothing happening right now. And at the end of the day, what me and Gabe really care about is the comic and always have. The comic is what's really, really fun for us. And any TV show or film would be terrifically exciting, in part because it would bring a lot of people to the comic. But whatever TV show or film came out of it would be different. It would not be the same thing. It would be its own work of art. So
with the rights coming back to you, do you have the ability to release a DVD of that?
No, Fox owns that, and they decided not to release it. I don't think they felt that it would be commercially available. Now, the other thing that we have talked about, which I think could be big, is doing a YouTube series called Sock and Key. That would be Kate and I with sock puppets, in front of a key house backdrop. I mean, it would be big, I think. And we do like little 3-minute things and stuff like that, and I can do all the voices.
You guys laughing in the world of Sharknado, that probably you probably saw that.
Hey, have you guys seen the preview for Ghost Shark? Yeah. Dude, the dude is on the slip and slide, and the ghost shark eats him. Holy shit! I love the 21st century.
We could actually call that up here.
All right, so I want to tell a quick story about how Locke Key came to be. I don't know how we're doing for time, but I feel this is an important story to tell. So my first comic, I was actually a comic book writer before I was a novelist. My breakthrough was with Spider-Man Unlimited with Marvel. A talent scout at Marvel had run one of my. I couldn't sell a novel to save my life. I had written several novels and I tried to sell and had failed. But I had some success with short stories, and I had a short story called 20th Century Ghost that was in a best of collection. And a talent scout at Marvel read that story and asked me if I would like to write a story about a man in tights punching other people. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And at that time, they were bringing in a lot of people. I think Jason Aaron also got his start in the same program. They were bringing in playwrights and people from other fields to see what they could do in comics. And for me, it was just this enormous dream. I had sent in an application for the Marvel tryout book when I was 12. I had always loved comics. I had 15 long boxes at home. I had always wanted to write for comics. I did write a Spider-Man story which completely sucked. It was saved by beautiful art. There was a thread. I just choked. I was so excited. I couldn't, I just blew it. Yeah. So it was like, premature Spider-Man ejaculation, but afterwards it got hooks in me, and I really wanted to do more. And so I sent in a bunch of pitches to Marvel, and I'm like, let me do another story. Let me pitch you one. And one of the things I pitched them on, I was a new father. I had an 18-month-old at home. So I pitched him on Baby Hulk because I was so terrified by the toddler's tantrums. Like he'd pick up a plastic truck and throw it at me, or hit my knee, and I'd think, what if you could pick up a real truck? And so I pitched him on Baby Hulk, and they didn't want that. And I pitched him on this idea for a haunted house full of enchanted keys. And they didn't want that either. And I let go the other pitches, but I kept thinking about that house. I would go out for late night diaper runs, and I'd think up a new key or some new character. It kept brewing. And here's the part of the story which really matters, even though it has nothing to do with Locke Key or IDW. One of these nights, I got to Walgreens at 1 in the morning, and I was just completely punch drunk, because you have a kid, you don't get any sleep. No one tells you how little sleep you're going to have when you have a little kid. And I walk in, and the speakers are like, tonight, we have 50% off on all lunch meats. And I just thought that was such a funny word, lunch meat. So I'm walking around, talking to myself, we have a sale on lunch meat. Lunch meat. And I walked around the corner of an aisle and bumped into this young woman while I'm like going, who wants my lunch meat? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Oh God. And I grabbed the diapers, and I'm paying. I'm like, Jesus, that was so fucking embarrassing. I'm so embarrassed. And I run outside and I jump in the red car, and I'm like, God. I'm probably gonna go down here and stick the keys in, and damn it. God, this car's not starting. And then I thought, I didn't take the red car. I took my white silver car. And I realize I'm sitting in the wrong car. And I see it all. It's her car. And she's gonna come out. I'm gonna get fucking arrested for 6 years. First, he was shouting in my face about his lunch meat. Then he was waiting for me in my fucking car. So I left out of the car, and I jumped back into my car, and I tore off that there. I fortunately was not arrested. It all turned out well. Years later, I pitched Locke Key to IDW, and they liked it. And then we had a comic, and so that was pretty cool. Anyway, and so the lunch meat part of the story doesn't actually figure in at all. Except that's the shape I was in when I worked out the story.
That's the one shot that you're finally going to finish off.
Yes, that is actually, where it's all been going. I was talking to people outside. People were asking about, I was saying I didn't want to reveal the spoiler of the last cover. You guys have been awesome, so I will tell you what I was saying to them, which is that the cover of Alpha 2 actually shows Deadpool kicking in the door of the house, and he's like shooting Tyler through the throat, and they're like, surprise, and it says like, it's all been going to this, And I just think that will be so awesome, and I know you guys will feel the same.
We've got about 10 minutes.
We can answer a couple more questions. We could do a speed round where I'll just answer questions but faster. Yeah, go ahead. He moved chairs to another spot to try to fool us into thinking he hasn't already asked a question, but I know. Go ahead.
Did your dad inspire any of your writings at all?
Did my dad inspire any of my writings?
We probably get that
at
question all the time.
No, I haven't actually had it. Just because it's phrased a little bit like, did he? I don't think I'd be a writer if not for my dad, who I think is the best writer in America. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you give some background on the prom scene in Locke Key?
Can you give some background? This is another Stephen King question, isn't it?
Yes.
It was a joke. I just thought it was funny. Actually, there's a moment at the prom where Scott Kavanaugh is in a wedding, dresses in a bridal gown, and he gets what appears to be blood dumped on him, and he screams and screams, and everyone looks at him and then goes back to dancing. And actually, that was an unusually hard scene to write. It's the only time, because I've always had fun with Locke Key. It's always been a goof. And I had the idea for the scene, and then I couldn't decide if it was distracting or not. I thought, is this going to pull everyone out of the story and get them thinking about my dad? Or will they still be, and in the end, I stuck with it because I thought if it had been any other writer, I would have left the joke in without a second thought. And the only thing that was making me hesitate was the fact that it's a joke on something my dad wrote. But if that scene had been in the Clive Barker book, I would have stuck in it in the heartbeat. The reason why is because it's true to the character. That's who Scott Kavanaugh and Jamal Saturday are. So I left it in. I thought it was funny. Go ahead.
Is there a good story behind the Bill Watterson looking art in when he was
Right. Is there a story behind Sparrow?
Yeah.
Just that I thought it would be really, really fun to see the world through Bodhi's perspective, and I wanted to do that kind of Calvin and Hobbes type style. And I also, and Gabe could pull it off, and also I really like the idea of doing, instead of doing something in traditional comic book form, doing a series of gag strips, 4-panel gag strips. And the only thing is because of the formatting of a comic book, the strips had to go down instead of across like you get them in a newspaper. But otherwise I wanted to test my ability to write a 4-panel gag strips, and it was fun. It was fun to do Full Watterson. I actually have a story that will kind of revisit that style, possibly for Golden Age. So.
Me?
Yeah.
So as the story comes to an end, are you ever gonna think back like years later and be like, oh, there's like another story I could have told, or more things you could have added?
She wants to know if there are, I will think back and there'll be like other stories or things I would want to add, or things that maybe things that I would want to change. Sometimes there are things there are things in the first 6 issues that I feel like I could go back and make smoother. There's a 2-panel sequence that I think has no point now, but it's only 2 panels out of the whole 6 issues, so that's not too bad. I do think it would be cooler if in the early scenes there were wampas in the background and like, panthers and stuff like that. And so we'll do that in a special edition that IDW has planned for you in 3D next year. Stay tuned. So, but the house does have 250 years of history, and there are stories that we have set up that we would like to tell at some point. Specifically, we've talked a lot about doing a World War II story that would be 6 issues long called Locke Key Battleground, that would explain, this is very inside baseball, but it would explain something called the riffle rule, which is the only major plot element. It's not really a major plot element, but it's the only thing we haven't ever really explained, which is why in the past grown-ups can see magic, but in the present day only kids can see magic. And the reason why is the rules of the house changed in the 1940s during World War II when Hans Riffel created a key that changes what grown-ups can see once they walk through the front door of Key House. But there was just no space to squeeze that story in, and at the end of the day, it didn't seem so important that readers would be like, oh, fuck this shit. And so I just let it go with the idea that eventually we would do this 6-issue World War II love story that in the process would help cover our asses a little bit. Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering, I like that the teenagers in Locke and Key are like smart but emotionally immature. Like you don't confuse being emotionally mature and stupid. I was wondering like how you write. What you think you write?
The kids are intellectually smart but emotionally stupid like kids are.
Yeah.
I was a kid once. Other kids. So and I have kids of my own. So I think that's really common. I think knowing better but not being able to help yourself is really common. Or doing the stupid thing and then saying 2 hours later I'm an idiot. And knowing it, but you can't help it because you are a kid, and that's part of what you do is fuck up. Yeah, go ahead.
As you're wrapping up the story, has your love for any particular character made you decide to spare them a gruesome death? Even if it's
Is it going to be on YouTube? I can tell them to click here to subscribe. Has my affection for any of the characters kept me from letting them die a gruesome death? Fuck, no. I firmly believe in Joss Whedon rules. The more you love them, the more it's my duty to, and then let them blow away like a leaf. leaf in the wind. I know, that was dirty. Dirty shot. One more? Maybe we do one more. One more? Yeah, one more. Go ahead, you got a question. You have gentle eyes too, I think it would be nice.
That's how he kills you.
When you're imagining your characters, was Gabriel able to put them down on paper and the scenes and settings that you would imagine in your head? Did it translate well, or were there things that you just think that you should change?
When I was imagining the characters, did Gabe capture them the way I pictured them, or did he essentially invent his own versions? You know, I'm up here, I'm talking about it like Locke Key is sort of like a one-man act. Bullshit. It's always been a collaborative story. It's only 50% mine. I have always learned as much about these characters from the way Gabe draws them as he's ever got from the way I've written them. And so much of the power and heart of the story, so many of the great ideas are the result of Gabriel Rodriguez's amazing work. And I've just been, you know, he's one of my best friends in the world, and I'm just tremendously lucky to have had a chance to work with both one of the most talented artists in comics, and also one of the kindest and most generous. So yeah, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about Key House and the kids. When I was writing the second issue of Welcome to Lovecraft, that was the one issue where I was really scared, where I felt like maybe I can't do this. I felt like, you know, the first issue was great, you know, I felt like I nailed it. Then I got the second issue and I wrote draft after draft after draft. I did 12 drafts. It was just terrible. I just couldn't figure out. And the reason why was I only knew who two of the people were. I knew who Bodie was and I knew who Tyler was. And I couldn't figure out how to write the characters. The other guy, I didn't know what they talk about. I didn't know what mattered to them. But gradually Gabe helped me because I would look at the way he would draw them. And I would kind of get it, you know. I could kind of say, oh, okay, I guess I do know about Kinsey now, you know. So yeah, Gabe has always been instrumental in characterization and story. I also want to say something about this guy having gentle eyes. I once did a. I just mentioned it because I once did a Q&A at San Diego Comic-Con where Jason Voorhees stood in the back. And I do mean, he stood there in a hockey mask like this for an hour. I mean, it was method acting.
But he may have had gentle eyes under the mask.
He may have had gentle eyes under the mask, but I mean, I was sweating it. I thought, you know, I was going to maybe get the love knife on my way out. Well, guys, listen, you guys are awesome. Thanks so much for reading the comic and all the other stuff. And I'm doing a signing tomorrow from
Tomorrow at noon till 1:30 down the IDW
You know.
booth. Show up early. Have gentle eyes.
Thanks so much for reading the comic. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Joe.